Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to Couch Conversations with the Doctors, where health is wealth. What night is it tonight? It is Monday night, and it is time for Couch Conversations with the Doctors. As always, we're going to go around our esteemed panel and do some introductions to the man who says that I threaten him to be here every Monday night. But guess what, guys? He is always on time. That's our very own Dr. James Miller. Dr. Miller.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Nikki, and also thanks to the Congressman for this forum. Happy to be here and to join my colleagues and to be able to discuss health care and health issues that affect our village. I'm a retired internist. I retired in 2019, but I'm still interested and concerned about the health care and the healing of our community. So I try to do what I can in the way that I can to continue to help heal the community as best as we can. So glad to be here, and hopefully we'll have a lively and stimulating conversation tonight.
Outstanding. Well, to the one that's known on these streets as Dr. 100, that means the doctor who keeps it real. That's our very own Dr. Maya Green. Dr. Green.
Good evening, Nikki. Good evening, Congressman and colleagues. I'm excited to be here. We've got to delve into some very interesting topics today that will help us come together and understand how to move with community. So I'm excited to get into it.
Outstanding, outstanding. To my colleague who tends to leave me and go and have fun in the sun. But guess what? He's here. He's hanging out in the shy where we are all burning up together. That's our very own Dr. Douglas Graham. Dr. Graham.
Thanks, Nikki. It's good to be back. It's good to be back in Chicago with my friends. I'll tell you, I'm like Dr. Miller. I retired in 2019, but after that, I spent 2 years with a congressman in Washington, D.C., and it's a real eye-opener. It's really an honor to be here with my colleagues, and I'm going to try and answer your questions as best I can.
Outstanding, and thank you so very much. Well, the weight loss guru, the family practice medicine doctor, the Wolfgang Puck of food, our very own Dr. Tony Hampton. Dr. Hampton.
Nikki, you're so generous with your words, and I'll receive that as long as I can show the potential of what the dietary approach I make. I shouldn't say make, but encourage my patients to adopt. And I've been so thrilled to see their success. So thank you so much, and always happy to be here. Although we're not talking about low carb in this forum, we're talking about tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about a topic that's touching a lot of people in the country, which is the temperature. So I'm really happy to be here, family doctor, obesity doctor. But as a family doctor, we have to deal with the spectrum of illness and wellness. And so I'm happy to be here, Nikki. Thank you.
Outstanding, outstanding. I want to say hey to Audrey Jaycox, who's with us. She says, good evening to everyone. To One Hope for All, who is here with us, sending up some emojis and some great thumbs up. I think that is simply great. Well, the congressman will be running a little late, and I do believe Joe and Dr. Mason is a little late behind too, but they are coming. Well, let's talk about the fact that it's 98 degrees outside today. How do we stay healthy in this type of heat? I mean, especially for those people who have to work outside, such as our police and fire and our construction workers. There's a lot of construction going on, a lot of infrastructure that's being built inside of Chicago. How do we stay healthy from a physician's perspective in this type of heat?
I'll get us started. Yeah, I'll get us started. And I was just coming home. And I think when I looked at the temperature inside the car or outside the car, it was about 95 degrees. And us Chicago folk are not as, comfortable with that temperature. A lot of times I'll look at my patients, and many of them are like, they hate that warm weather, which is why they still live in Chicago. And then others love it. So for me, as a doctor, I try to remind patients that it's the summer. So when you're in the summer, the first thing that you want to think about is hydration. It's kind of obvious. And although and any type of fluid is helpful, but water is the best fluid from above. So hydration. And it's not just about feeling thirsty, guys. It's about, I just need to hydrate. I once seen a study where they hydrated the people going through the desert excessively before they left, and then they hydrated people while they were going through the desert. And shockingly, during that study, they found that as long as they got the same amount of hydration, it still kind of worked, right? So the people in the beginning probably weren't that thirsty, but they just did it in preparation. So your body is amazing and is able to do wondrous things. So when you know the weather's crazy, you don't want to get dehydrated because it'll sneak up on you. So the first thing is, let's hydrate. The second thing that's really important is if you're able to, I had to go to work today, but many of my patients are retired. So for those patients, if they don't need to go outside during the excessively high temperatures, and I would argue between maybe 10 or 11 in the morning up to about 4 or 5, those are the times to probably stay in the house if you don't need to go outside. And if you do need to go outside, you may want to kind of know where you can get some shade. Make sure you wear light clothing. If you go to places like Miami, San Diego, they really dress lightly and they're kind of used to that. And maybe we're not used to it in Chicago, but you want to wear clothes that are lighter, looser, and cooler so that you can do your thing there. And then, of course, the third thing that comes to mind is protecting your skin. And yes, African-American folk can get, sunburn, right? So everybody can get sunburn, although we may have a little extra protection if we have darker skin, but everybody needs to protect their skin. And I would say this, the part that kind of throws people off is that if you're sweating or if you're getting in water, you may have to reapply the sunscreen so that you can protect your skin. And I think the last thing I'll mention before I let my colleagues chime in is there are a lot of heat-related illnesses, and we can talk a little bit more about this in detail, but you have, heat exhaustion, you have heat strokes, and when you have those risks, right, those types of things can really put you in harm's way. So if you're not feeling your best, if you are nauseated, your heart's racing, and you're just like you want to throw up, it's probably because you're heading towards exhaustion or even heat stroke. In those settings, it's really important that you seek medical attention because particularly a heat stroke can be very dangerous, and you want to make sure that you are not taking it lightly. Just like a stroke that you would have from another reason, how fast you get to the hospital and attention you get once you get there is going to be really critical to how well you do. So I'll kind of lay the foundation with those comments and see if my colleagues want to add to that.
Well, one of the other things I'll add is that during any kind of extreme of weather, it is a time to use good common sense. Good common sense says, that it's hot outside. And I know, people have things that they've been planning for weeks and months. This is not the time to do those things. It's, a few days, waiting a few more days is not going to cause you any problems. So this is the time to use common sense in terms of your activities, in terms of, your where you if you decide that I'm going to go out and play basketball today, this outside, this is not the time for older people especially to be out there. And age is another factor. As we get older, we tend to have less resilience, and so we tend to have more difficulty with tolerating these extremes in the weather condition, more so than someone who's younger. Plus, sometimes we have chronic diseases that will cause additional problems and they can decompensate and cause us to get ill. So using good common sense, in addition to the thing that Dr. Hampton talking about, drinking water, dressing, not overdressing, and making certain that your activity level is appropriate for the circumstances that you're in.
I'd just add that you really want to wear hats when you're out in the sun, and with broad brims, high tops, not really the tight little baseball caps, because it's your head that really suffers the most when you're in the direct sun. So the more you can protect your head and your face, the longer you'll be able to tolerate it. I'd also put in a plea about young kids. When you have very, very small kids, they're also less able to tolerate the heat. So that's not the time to leave them outside or leave them in the car. You want to be very, very careful about how much time they're exposed to the heat these days.
And I'll add a little bit more context in terms of this ideal of a heat exhaustion versus heat stroke. So when I think about a heat stroke, so your body is very smart, and its job is to regulate your core temperature. But if your temperature gets too high and you become overheated, you can enter a phase of exhaustion that can then become life-threatening. We tend to think about heat exhaustion as a phase right before the heat stroke, when you begin to feel heat illness, and it can be something like, muscle weakness. You can get fatigue. You can have excessive sweating in the beginning. You can get dizzy. And I mentioned earlier about nausea. And then, of course, your body's trying to make you sweat. And so your heart rate may go faster. And again, we don't want to get to the heat stroke part, because that's when it becomes a medical emergency. And again, if you have a heat stroke, you're at risk for potentially having brain damage and literally, other than the confusion and other symptoms you have beforehand, even loss of consciousness, people have died from heat stroke. So it's really important that we really take it seriously and make sure that the people around us are aware. I think that's the most important thing. We're sometimes on autopilot. Some people are not even paying attention to the weather. And what we want to do is be able to create awareness, particularly with our older individuals, those who are 65 and up. They don't have the ability to regulate their body temperature or even know that something's changing. Your body is less efficient. Now, I'm not saying that's an automatic thing. I've seen people, when I was on a low carb cruise recently, we had people, diving and snorkeling, and they were like 80, right? And they did not look like they were 80. So you can be older and be quite athletic. You can be your body can function just like you were 40, but for a lot of Americans, their body's not like that. Therefore, they may not respond, and they may not have the symptoms of a heat stroke like a younger person. So, and then they have other things going on. They're using all these medicines, and sometimes those medicines can impact how you respond. And it's similar to what was mentioned earlier, which is our babies, our small babies. They also they're not able to do things as effectively, like they don't sweat as effectively and things like that to help remove heat. So I think it's really important that we give the people who need extra attention when it comes to the issues around heat stroke. And I think if we do that, we put people out of harm's way. And so besides drinking a lot of water, being hydrated and things like that, not overexposing yourself to the sunlight, knowing that, yes, where do I need to be? So if I know I'm doing an activity where that's going to be in a hot environment, then where's the nearest air conditioned building that I can get to if I need it? Do I need to talk to my doctor about my medicines to determine, will my medicines impact my ability to regulate my temperature? Rather as an antihistamine, antidepressant, or whatever. So those are the types of things that we want to be thoughtful of. But most importantly, you just want to be prepared and have a sense of awareness of the things that may or may not impact your ability to regulate your heat.
I want to say hey to Chief Valdemar Talley that's here. And he says, good evening to everyone. Pamela Dominguez is here. And she also says, good evening to everyone. Kim Ball says, what is the role of the local public health department in addressing this problem? Are there any being held accountable? Well, yes, there are. And actually, Dr. Green has actually put the link in the chat already. to the listing and the information from the Chicago Department of Public Health, which is actually mirrored by the Cook County Department of Public Health and also the Illinois Department of Public Health. And the CDC actually put up everything a couple in the beginning of the summer, but each time the temperature exceeds 78, they make sure that they repost so you would be aware, but we'll make sure that we get those links into the chat for you. So if you would like to download them or just review them at your own leisure, we will make sure that they are there. Pamela also says excellent advice. So Kimball, I want to thank you for that statement. So thank you so very much. Judge Marianne Jackson is here with us, and she says, good evening to everyone. Will Cook says, can stress and high heat raise your blood sugar if you are a diabetic type 2?
Yeah.
Well, I see Dr. Hampton nodding.
Yeah, well, I'll give you a nod. And, I spend a lot of time taking care of diabetes. And again, shout out to my wife for us. She's my best teacher. And because of her, I've become an expert on diabetes to a certain extent. But anyway, yeah, the first obvious part of this question is when you're under stress of any kind, your body is a fight or flight moment for your body. So your body's going to say, oh my God, I need to be ready for the war. So your liver will produce cortisol, which will then create, well, I shouldn't say the liver, your adrenals produce cortisol, but then it'll tell your liver to, via something called gluconeogenesis, to release glucose into your blood. So that stress of any kind, but particularly in this case, the heat, will then raise your blood sugar because your body's trying to prepare to run out of that heat. So you really want to understand, but if you're not running out of the heat, it will affect your blood sugars. Think about some of the medicines we take, because most people with diabetes have blood pressure problems. So they may be on a diuretic, right? So people who are taking a hydrochlorothiazide as an example to deal with that, they may get dehydrated because they're taking that, and that can negatively affect their blood sugars as well. I look at it as, well, there's less blood volume because you're dehydrated, so the sugar is more concentrated, so that can impact you. And then even your insulin absorption. So let's just say you have diabetes and you're trying to, you want to take your insulin. The high temperatures affects your blood vessels. They can dilate them, and they can actually increase the absorption of insulin. Therefore, maybe overshooting and making your blood sugars too low. So, but I think in the context of this question, it's all about the fact that you're going to be under stress. And so I think for most of us, the biggest risk factor is that your sugars are going to go up. And I'm always amazed when I'm with my wife or other people with diabetes, how the most minor thing, like we just saw what happened to happened to ex-President Trump, that stress of that moment for some people, right? Rather you're thinking about your own safety or the country we live in, and why is it so unsafe? You can't even go to a rally and be safe. That's stressful. And a person who literally ate the right diet that Dr. Hampton prescribes, why did their blood sugar spike to 200 or 250? Because of the stress. So those little things we have to factor in. So that's why people with diabetes have to really be careful that they pay attention to various factors, so that when they think about their day, what's happening with my day? And if there's things that are stressful going on, do I then need to have a little extra protection, or how do I mitigate it? And if you think through these things, you'll be fine. Long answer to a short question.
Well, thank you so much. Cindy Scott is here, and she says hello to everyone. Want to say hey to all of our friends over at the Core Center who is watching. We know you guys are there. Thank you so much. Hey, Core Center. We have an anonymous statement that says, thank you, Dr. Graham, for mentioning the fact of wearing some type of hat or something on your head. I, too, take a blood pressure medication that's a combination that includes hydrochlorothiazide, and it says that makes you sensitive to the sun and heat. And my doctor has told me to wear a hat. And that's one thing that I do. Also, if I could just briefly share, I don't know if Nikki's going to read my entire, well, I'm not going to read your entire comment, but I will read the beginning of it, which says, yes, stress will increase. Stress will increase numbers, be it blood pressure and or diabetes. But let's not be fooled by some of the things that people do. Sometimes people bring things on themselves for media purposes. And I'm not going to read the rest of that comment, but trust and believe I understand what you're saying in reference to everything that's going on. And this country really is not that bad. And I do understand what you're talking about. And you are right. Some people can bring things on themselves. We are not a judge and a jury, nor can we say, who did what. But I hear you, and I hear you loud and clear. And I think there are others who have heard you just as well. So thank you so very much for your statement. I want to say hey to Alderman Pat Dow, who is here with us just as well. Dr. Maya, we have an anonymous question for you. The person asked, can heat make you angry?
Yeah, because it causes dysregulation. So extreme anything, extreme heat can cause it, extreme cooling can cause it, but heat, you heard everybody say, I want to get mad when it gets hot. It does cause dysregulation. Dr. Hampton or Dr. Graham or Dr. Miller mentioned increased heart rate, and with increased heart rate does come a release of those same stress hormones. I know we were talking about with diabetes and things like that, and extreme heat, and that can cause adrenaline rushes and things like that for you to, and yeah, it can. I do want to mention a couple of things before we move on regarding heat. I put in the chat for anyone, that way you can go back to it, after today, you can say, where did I see that? You saw it on Nikki's chat. You saw it on the Couch Conversations tab. So the difference between heat stroke and heat exhaustion essentially is the presence or capacity, mental capacity. So when you start seeing confusion and things like that, that's a step before someone is not conscious. But as Dr. Hampton said, you don't have to be a medical expert. You don't have to be like, is that heat stroke? Or, you seek medical attention. If they have the ability to sip cold water and move to a cool place, do that, and that doesn't mean don't do anything else. You still reach out for help as needed. I also want to mention, Dr. Graham, I think, mentioned kids. I don't know who mentioned kids. You also don't want to leave your kids, whether they be human or furry kids, in any cars, or yourself, in any cars during this time. There are a lot of people that they experience, because think about it, in that enclosed place. And sometimes even if you crack the window, there's not enough air, and the heat starts building and rising. So it's going to be hotter in those closed areas, like your car, than it is outside. So if it's 98 outside, then in the car it can get much hotter, and there's nowhere for that to go. So don't leave any humans, don't leave any furry friends, anything living. If you're a plant parent, don't leave it in the heat that high unattended. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about is community. I put in the chat the cooling centers for the city of Chicago. We have mentioned stay hydrated. If you have air, keep the air there, keep the air on, things like that. If you don't have air, there are places that have air. They're the city of Chicago cooling centers to keep you cool. But also, the first time I had to come off the video, it was because my mom called me back. Now, my mom is a sassy, senior. I've been calling her.
She's sassy and seasoned. She's sassy and seasoned.
Yeah. And so I've been calling her all day. She, calls me back when she gets back. I had to say, hey, it's going to be a visit. You want a visit from all of us at the same time, trying to find out, because you have to check on your tribe. Yep. Your seniors, your young people, each other, Dr. Miller mentioned if I have high blood pressure, heart disease, asthma, diabetes, things like that, if I'm dealing with unfortunate cancer, things like that, it can throw your body off and make it less able to deal with the heat. So we're dealing with 98 to someone else that could be 100. You know, it can be like dealing with 104, which 104 is the temperature in which your body enters into heat exhaustion. Up to 104 is heat exhaustion. Usually, if you go over that, that's heat stroke. But the bottom line is, just like everything else, check on your tribe. If you have not talked to your loved ones today, go ahead, keep us rolling, but go ahead and send them a text, reach out to them, call them, check in in the morning, check in when it's, around noon, check in around 2, right? And from 2 to 5, do that intensive checking in, and just make sure, you have everything. I'm trying to tell my mom, you don't have to really go outside, lady. We can deliver anything you need just to keep you comfortable and cool and safe, right? So check on your tribe.
Outstanding. Well, Dr. Maya, there is one more question for you. This person says, hey, Dr. Maya, I am your favorite police officer. I am out here in these streets. And today I had a funny type of episode. I believe it was related to the heat. However, I felt like I was having vertigo type symptoms. I was dizzy, spinning in the head. I've had vertigo before, but I've been fine. Could this have been the heat? I mean, we do wear a lot of stuff. And you're muted, Dr. Maya.
Yeah, I would go ahead and look at, CDC publishes it, but I did put in the chat, it says heat exhaustion versus heat stroke. Heat exhaustion, if you're starting to feel, and I think Dr. Hampton, you mentioned it earlier, if you're starting to feel dizzy, nausea, a vertigo is a form, but it has, but a lot of times vertigo is like unto dizziness. I would definitely move into sipping cool water, going somewhere safe, making that call to say, hey, maybe it's time to move and do the great work you do inside, or somewhere where there's air conditioning and cooler temperatures, right? And then you can also reach out to your primary care doctor if you need support for that. I'm sure the provider you trust is happy to see you.
Outstanding. I want to say hey to Sister Bonnie, who is here with us. She says, good evening to everyone. Good evening. Well, Dr. Miller, the question is, they say drink lots of fluids. Tea is a fluid. Does tea dehydrate you, or is it okay to drink tea?
I think iced tea is okay. Water is really important. So fluid, tea is having iced tea kind of cools you off, and so it's okay to have some iced tea, but don't let that be your primary fluid. Let water be your primary fluid. If you just need something that has a taste to it, okay, iced tea is all right. Don't put a lot of sugar in the iced tea, but that would be okay.
All right. Well, Dr. Green, I know you was itching to say something just then, so go right ahead. I think she may be frozen. Oh, go ahead, Doc.
Well, there are some things you want to stay away from. One might be alcohol, which may dehydrate you quicker.
No martinis?
Martini one or martinis plural. So from
the person who doesn't even drink, but no martinis.
is pop. Pop has a lot of sugar. Sugar can really change your water balance, and you can get very thirsty and dehydrated from that too. So tea sounds safe to me, but pop, alcohol, that's a different animal.
All right. Well, Dr. Tony, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Maya that the tea is generally safe. It's not like coffee has more of a diuretic or making you urinate effect than tea. Now, of course, tea still has a little, but not enough to make a big impact. And, my wife's from Mississippi, so, we do sweet tea in Mississippi. And too much sweet tea is a problem. I try to get patients to kind of move away from the sugar tea that we're so used to consuming and move towards maybe pure monk fruit, pure stevia. In other words, there are other things you can consume that, number one, won't add all that sugar that can have negative health effects, because too much sugar can actually make dehydration worse. It makes your cells transfer more water into your urine, and you're urinating more because you're eating sugary drinks. So we don't want to have sweet tea. You have to be careful about that. Obviously, alcohol is at the top of the list, and that's going to be a problem. So you want to be careful with that. But in general, coffee is a bigger problem. And I think if you're having a cup of coffee in the morning, you're good. But there are people, and you know who they are, who drink multiples of cups of coffee throughout the day. And other than how it affects you in other ways, like your sleep, it's probably a good idea to start cutting back to take care of that issue. So.
Well, coffee, huh? I'm not a coffee drinker, but I am a tea-aholic. I do drink tea all day, but today I was drinking water because most days I replace my water with tea, but not today. It was just too hot. I want to say hey to Michelle. Michelle says, good evening to everybody. T.M. Cook says, certain materials can make you feel very warm and uncomfortable. That is absolutely right. Absolutely right, Tim. I mean, Mr. Cook, so thank you so very much for that, because that is absolutely right. There are certain fabrics that are clingy that can make you feel a whole lot warmer. However, I do believe you should wear clothing, because I tend to see people strip clothing when it gets really hot outside. And clothing is actually better. Am I correct? Dr. Maya Green or Dr. Tony or Miller or Doug?
Well, you do want to provide some level. It's just like that hat that was mentioned earlier, right? So there are some protection from that direct heat that you're going to experience when you clothe your body. Obviously, you want to have thin clothing to protect your body. So yeah, you know how it feels when that direct heat hits your body. And nobody really understands the power of the sun until you travel to, like when we went to for the low carb cruise, it was in St. Thomas, St. Croix, Puerto Rico. It seems like that heat feels a little different and you feel it in a way that maybe you don't feel it at home. So I do agree with that. In the low carb community, we talk a lot about, do you need electrolytes and things like that? Well, at the end of the day, I think the answer is, if you're drinking a lot of fluids, you can kind of dilute your electrolytes in a way. So you do want to start thinking about, do I need to have electrolytes in my body while I'm, trying to hydrate? Because you need those things. In fact, my favorite electrolyte is magnesium, and magnesium is really important. It actually helps to regulate your body temperature, believe it or not. And magnesium probably has over 300 to 400 different functions, but it's really important to deal with that. And then this is the part that loses people. When you sweat, you lose salt, right? Anybody who's ever had a chance to, kind of taste the salt on their arm, kids do this stuff all the time, and you'll notice that it's salty. So truth be told, you may have to replace some of that salt in that setting. So it's kind of the opposite of what your doctor would normally say. But so you need to think about hydration. You need to think about clothing. You need to think about electrolytes, particularly if you're really consuming a lot of water. So that's kind of how I see it. And I think my colleagues would agree.
And yes, and Dr. Hampton, I want to add, if you are replenishing your electrolytes with something like Gatorade, things like that, I want to mention the sugar amount in there. And, of course, well, I will say that's not my first choice of what to replenish with. Something like water, something like with a little salt, with the, you know, things like that. But water, like Dr. Mason says, I'll be Dr. Mason. Nothing is water. Water is water. Water with flavor ain't water. Water with sugar ain't water. Water with whatever ain't water. Water is water. There you go. I hope I made you proud, Dr. Mason. Okay. And so you definitely want to go with water. If you must drink it, like have that Gatorade flavor, it's a whole this much water. This much water. I know y'all get my chocolate mixed up with this. You know, you can't tell that difference, you know, but this much water and this much Gatorade. Just a little dash if you must. But in the words of Dr. Mason, only water is water. And our bodies being composed of so much water, we definitely need it. So thank you. I went out, but I see Dr. Hampton had my back. I was just about to talk about the things what kind of drinks to avoid. I see you mentioned alcohol. You know, it's rooftop season, y'all. And a lot of people want to go to the rooftop, have that alcohol, things like that. That's going to dehydrate you, right? So if I'm drinking my standard amount of water and I have the tea with the caffeine, right? If I'm having a lot of sugary drinks, if I'm having coffee, if I'm having alcohol, right? That takes my water balance, right, down. So I have to drink more water, right? I can't say, oh, I drank my standard amount, but I'm about to have these drinks and things like that. You do have to make that adjustment and bring that to balance. So I just want to mention that.
Well, outstanding. Well, send us. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Miller.
Yeah, I was just going to mention. I mean, read the note from the police officer who I'm assuming is outside. But those people who are working outside in the hot weather and they are moving about and perspiring and sweating a lot, they may need to add a little something to their water or take something in salt in terms of because they're going to be losing salt if they're sweating a lot. So they may need to add a little something. And one of the things that is very common with people that are sweating a lot in this hot weather is that they'll feel muscle cramps in their legs and those kinds of things, which is an indication that you're losing electrolytes, and you probably need to do something to replace that. You need to replace the water, but you also need to replace the electrolytes.
Outstanding. Well, Sendell Scott asked, how about carbonated water? Maya?
I know people that like the carbonated water, and I say, hey, if you like it, drink it, but you still have to drink water, right? The thing about a lot of the carbonated waters is that's just a shot in the dark. It's like going to the vitamin counter and saying, hey, I picked up XYZ vitamin, doc. Should I take it? I don't know what's in that. I know water is water, and I know, things like that. So the things about the carbonated water is they do a lot of things to boost the flavor, put the carbonation in there. You got some gases in there and things like that. And it generally does not have the same impact as what we call still water or just kind of regular water.
So GT says, I read that lisinopril users cannot take potassium. If you guys know that right offhand, or if you're looking it up, we're going to grab that question in 1 second. But we do have a specific question that says, how, and I'm not laughing at you. I'm just laughing at, I know you were typing fast when you sent this. They say, how do you control hot flashes in this heat? I feel as if I am on fire, literally. Thank you so much for sharing. Well, how do you control hot flashes in this heat? I mean, a hot flash puts you at 150 degrees. And if it's 100 outside, now you're at 250 degrees. How are you maintaining?
Well, I mean, I think this is difficult, right? So you have to, all the things we mentioned are the same things you would do. You would hydrate, you would try to stay. I mean, I remember, well, I don't want to get too personal, but let's just say me and my wife have different temperature needs in the house, right? So when she's having those moments, you really have to just then do the things that have worked for you beyond even what we're talking about. So a cooler room is so important. Hydration is so important. Many of my patients have done really well with herbal supplements like black cohosh. They do really well with that. And so I guess there's no, from my perspective, there's no magic solution. You just, when you know that you're going through menopause and you also know I have to be in that environment, you need to be very thoughtful about, is my air conditioner that, I may have to make sure the Freon is up to date in my car. I need to make sure that hand fan that you see people at the sports games with, I have that handy, or that fan that we see at church is handy. So you have to have those things in place. And I'll be honest, in the world I live in, which is the low carb world, many women who do that find that because their sugars are not up and down, they tend to have better hormone regulation. So a lot of my patients who have adopted a lower carb diet have really benefited with less menopausal symptoms. That's not going to help you today with 95-degree temperatures, but it is something to think about moving forward, because some people have menopausal symptoms for years, while others get it for a few years, and literally for some people it just doesn't go away. So we need to have a long-term and a short-term strategy for that.
Well, I see our congressman has made it. I promised that he would be here with us on this evening, and he wanted to make sure that you are aware of heat exhaustion, heat strokes, how to stay safe during these types of temperatures, and what's best to do. So I hope we answered your question when you asked, how do you deal with hot flashes and the heat? And you gave those temperature numbers. I think they gave some great alternatives, such as the supplements that you can use and making sure that you hydrate. I mean, nobody can say that water is water. That's water, like Dr. Mason and or Dr. Maya Green, because there is no substitute for water. So you got to hydrate with water. But then also, just as a little caveat, I stop at the Walgreens or the CVS or whatever store that I can find that has those instant cool packs that you just squeeze and they become cool. And when we have those private summers, as I call them, I tend to take that and use those either on my wrist, the palm of my hands, or the bottom of my feet, and trust and believe they will make a wonder for you. Jordan, I see that you're putting in the chat, how do you reverse type 2 diabetes? We're going to get to that in our last 4 minutes of the show, but we wanted to make sure that we informed everyone about staying safe with this heat. Congressman?
Well, let's go ahead to those 4 minutes, and I'll comment as we end.
Okay. All right. Well, I think Dr. Miller was having just a little technical difficulties. Dr. Maya, there's another question for you. And this question says, Dr. Maya, while dealing with the heat, I do take a couple hypertensive medications. I am also a diabetic and I take insulin. I'm an insulin dependent diabetic, and I work a full-time job, and I am out in this heat. I also have a few kidney issues where I have to watch my intake on my fluids. Do I have the opportunity where I can splurge on certain days? Or how do I maintain that when I really need to hydrate in this heat?
I do recommend the safety that comes with setting your body on a routine. I will disclose, I was diagnosed with prediabetes. It was during the pandemic. I was eating a lot of shenanigans, and I had to change my taste buds, right? So I had to learn how to eat to live and not focus on kind of living to eat. But in the space you are in, portion control, half whatever you're doing, maybe even 1/4, and then begin to add in plants, fruit, vegetables, the water. And like Dr. Miller said, if you're that person that's working in heat, Look at sources that balance electrolytes, those things that add your minerals back in. The other thing I want to say is, if this is from the person from earlier, if you're, going to exercise, because that is part of what you're doing to maintain with blood pressure and diabetes, you want to exercise during the hours where they're not extreme heat. Typically, the hours of the highest peak of heat is from 2 to 4. Some places 2 to 5, but that's the average. Look at what's high in the extreme heat hours in your local area, and you want to gear your exercise way before or way after those high peak points during the day, or make sure you stay in the air-conditioned gym where you're, till you cool down after your exercise. So regulation is the key. Setting your body on a routine, and something we're moving towards that has results for not only tomorrow, but 10 years down the line, is routine and discipline in your body.
Outstanding. Well, Santa shares that I carry pink Himalayan salt to put under my tongue on really humid days when I'm out walking. It works within 2 minutes when I feel lightheadedness coming on from the heat. Well, thank you so very much for sharing that. Thank you so much. Natasha Hall is here, and she says, good evening to everyone. And CBUC says, I just tuned in. Was there any discussion on alkaline water? If so, please briefly share again, Brother Eddie Reed. Well, alkaline water, how is that for hydration?
I personally, the basic concept of alkaline water is that you make your body more alkaline, which in theory is very helpful in theory. And you can, but let me just say this. If you put lemon in your water, it has the same effect as alkaline water. If you put apple cider vinegar in your water, it has the same effect of alkaline water. But you got to understand your body. It's just like cholesterol. We've been trained forever that dietary cholesterol is going to have a huge impact on your cholesterol, and that's just false. Most of the cholesterol in your body is made in the liver, and your body's very smart. So even if you consume all this extra cholesterol, which we don't even believe in the low carb community is harmful, it's not going to have an impact on your cholesterol like we once thought. Having said that, the short answer to the question is, I would not spend a lot of resources and money on alkaline anything, because your body doesn't, based on research, your body is not going to be impacted in the way that you think by spending all your resources on those things. The better approach is to eat a whole foods diet that will allow your body to do what it needs to be at the right pH. So I would not do that, although I know it's out there in YouTube and social media, etc. So that's kind of how I approach that until I see randomized controlled trials that says this is a very effective approach. I think people are barking down the wrong tree. Now, if you just add a little lemon to your water, if that's your concern, that's way cheaper than spending a lot of money on alkaline water. So that's been my experience based on research. I think that's important to know. And I just want to comment, circling back to the question that Dr. Maya was answering about, what do you do if you have diabetes? And at the end of the day, this sounds like common sense, but if you stop eating the things that raise your blood sugar, you can reverse diabetes. That sounds very simplistic, right? But if you check your meter an hour or two after you ate something, I don't care what guru said that it was good for you. If it raises your blood sugar, then stop eating that and start eating the things that don't raise your blood sugar. And that's a very simple approach, but I released 2 testimonial videos this past week on my YouTube channel. And they were just people that just reduced the things that were causing harm. In their particular case, it was excessive carbs. So I think for anybody checking us out, no matter what dietary approach you prefer, if you're eating something that spikes your blood sugar, why are you still eating that? Well, I need the phytonutrients and the antioxidants in that fruit that just raised my blood sugar. No logical person thinks that's smart. instead avoid that particular item and eat some items that don't do that. And I think that, so for those who are not aware, yes, you can reverse type 2 diabetes. It's a very simple process of avoiding the foods that spike your sugar. It's very simple. And I don't think anybody should be overly concerned about that. And then the other question that was raised was lisinopril. And with lisinopril, yes, lisinopril has been known to raise your potassium level just a little bit. So it's particularly a problem if you are already taking potassium potentially. But I'll be honest with you, I have plenty of patients on, maybe a water pill, and they're on potassium because of the water pill. And if you think about it, how many people are on an ACE inhibitor because of diabetes, like lisinopril, enalapril, anything with a pril, but they're also on a water pill and they're also on potassium. So I think to over worry about that is probably not necessary. But if you're a person who's also supplementing with potassium, you have to then pay attention. Most electrolyte supplements that we recommend are not going to have super high levels of potassium, although it may have potassium. So the goal is to be aware of this so that when your doctor does your complete metabolic profile, they can look at the potassium and make sure when you're adding electrolytes or any other potassium supplement in lieu of that lisinopril being on board, that it doesn't spike you. But I have not, in my 29 years of practice, seen that being a huge problem. It's just the awareness of it is what's important.
Well, Dr. Nelson says, hello, Dr. Hampton. He's sending you a special hello to you. Dr. Hampton, I have a statement for you. Well, it's a statement and a question from Buster. Yeah. Buster says, thank you, Dr. Hampton, for talking about how to reverse type 2 diabetes. I am a diabetic. I am in my early 30s. But here's my question. I know that if I stop eating the Hershey bars or Paydays, which are things that I have stopped eating years ago, will lower my sugar. But there are some things that I have a struggle with letting go. Around the holidays, I have to have a piece of my mom's sweet potato pie. Or I must have just a little of the peach cobbler. When it's hot out like today, I really want some black walnut ice cream. And it's an urgency to have it. Do I have an addiction? And if so, what can I do? Is there a place where you can go for food addiction such as this? I know that it's not healthy for me, but sometimes my body craves it so till I really have to have it.
All right. So what I'll do is answer that question while sharing what I call my link tree. On my link tree, many people are aware of what that is. One of the links is to Dr. Joan Iflin's Processed Food Addiction. Dr. Joan Iflin wrote the book on processed food addiction. So you do have support, and what that support looks like, it's like AAA for people with processed food addiction. So 14 hours of programming, Zoom meetings that just regularly occur. And in that setting, for people who struggle, they have their peers and the people who are experts to kind of walk with them. So you literally could be cooking and listening in, or listening in and chiming in. And that tends to help people. I know in our health system, Advocate Health, we have coaches. One of the biggest problems with our addiction is we have to eat what we call high satiety foods. In other words, foods that allow you to feel full. And if you eat protein and fat, those are going to make you feel full. If you eat, just think about a Chinese food, you eat it because of all the rice, then, you feel great. 2 hours later, you're hungry again. That's because the glucose spikes, and then the insulin goes up to lower the glucose. Then the sugar goes down, and then you're hungry again. But if you eat a ribeye or some air fried chicken, because of the protein and fat, you won't be hungry. So the first thing you have to do, besides get coaching and support, check that link out, is you get yourself on a diet that's not going to make you feel hungry all the time. That's why so many people struggle with dieting, because they're on diets that they have to eat like a cow all day. I mean, I literally eat twice between like maybe 1 and 7 or 6 every day. And I'm not even hungry when I eat most of the time, because I eat a diet that makes me feel full. So I think and then what you do, if you're fortunate enough, and this is for people who decide to go into low carb, if you go into ketosis, if you're eating less than 50 carbs a day, that'll get 80% into ketosis. but maybe nearly 100% if they're eating less than 30 total grams, not net, of carbs a day, you will be in ketosis, meaning that you will depend on fat fuel, which means if you need to lose weight, you'll burn belly fat. But more importantly, your body's not dependent on those ups and downs of your glucose. And what will happen is you'll start to lose that belly fat, your blood sugars will stabilize. And in many cases for type 2s, you will be able to put that type 2 diabetes into remission for the first time. You'll see A1Cs at 5.6 or lower. You're going to be shocked. Your doctor's going to be shocked. But if you choose to take that path, and I have videos that will help you with that on that Linktree, make sure that you are working with a doctor who can help de-prescribe medications, because most doctors are not used to de-prescribing. They want to give you Ozempic, they want to give you Jardiance, they want to give you a statin. And when it's time to reduce those medicines, they haven't been trained to do that. So you have to really work with a doctor and or your current doctor who's not trained to say, hey, I think I want to, you notice my blood pressure is lower, my blood sugar is lower. Can we start to reduce that medicine? Because otherwise you're going to have hypoglycemia and then be at risk for that. So the short answer, listen, anybody can do this. You just need to do it safely. And when you start to get into this place where you're not addicted, well, you're always going to have addiction. You have Dr. Joan Iflin would say our neurons that deal with addiction will never go away. They just go dormant. So whenever you drive by Krispy Kreme, they wake up and say, hey, I'm here. And you want to go into Krispy Kreme, especially when the hot light is on, right? But what happens, that's when you really want to get it. But the reality is, the first thing you need to do is stop taking that streak that's where Krispy Kreme is on, because it's going to trigger you, right? And if you work with groups that help you understand you need to take a different route, that'll help you. So the key is, let's stay away from the triggers, let's eat the right diet, and then feel full. And then when you're having gatherings, you may have to decide, is this a day when I will indulge? Now, some people with processed food addictions can't indulge ever because they'll go right back down that addiction rabbit hole, but some people can't. So you have to make a decision. Am I going to indulge? What is that indulgence going to look like? Can I do it safely? And more importantly, when we made in my home, my wife is more keto and I'm more carnivore. We make a chocolate cake, and our ingredients are butter, dark chocolate, and eggs, no flour, no sugar, and it turns into a cake and or a cupcake. And it only has about 5 or 6 carbs per serving versus what normally would be 50 or 60. Maria Emmerich is a great author who writes all of these great books. So yes, you can still have fun stuff. You just have to do it in a keto-friendly fashion if you have a medical condition like diabetes in particular. So I do think there's hope. I'll even put in the link, I'll put Maria Emmerich's books, one of her books, just to give you hope. In fact, I'm going to give you a hard time, and I'm going to give you Maria Emmerich's kids book, because her kids book has all the fun stuff in it that you would love to eat, that kids like to eat. And I think that would be a good place to start so you can get those desserts and things of that nature.
All right. Well, GT says, thanks, Dr. Tony. Timeless Jury by Deborah says, hello, but she also says it's interesting that after 60 days of keto carnivore that I don't even crave sweets anymore. Well, CBUC says, thanks. This is always an amazing session each Monday. Thanks so very much to Congressman Davis and all of you, Brother Eddie Reed. Also, Natasha Hall says, does any of the doctors have any anti-diabetic healthy diet plans that can be made accessible to everyone, or a recommendation? So if anybody has any diets that can possibly be downloaded, or
I'll put a link in there.
Yeah,
I'll put a link to Eat This, Don't Eat That. It's a 2-page handout. I'll just put a link there. Anything you want to add, Dr. Maya?
Make sure I
The congressman said, make sure he gets it.
So also, one of the things I find so very important is, if I approach, as a person that was diagnosed with pre-diabetes, if I approach something thinking, hey, this is a diet, I'm gonna have to do this to get things under control. For me, it has a different impact than understanding how I have to regulate what I have to do for a 70-year-old Maya, for Maya next week, for Maya 2 days from now. Because I'm at that age where if I eat it, I'm gonna feel it, even 2 days from now, So, I actually had to move to a way of living, and that means you have to find the balance that works for you, right? And so I think thank you, Dr. Tony, for dropping those links in the chat. That's going to be a wonderful start, and you take the things that work for you, and then the things that don't work for you, you find other sources. You get a repertoire of all these lovely, yummy things you like to eat, and all this also activity that you like to do. And in the heat, you're going to do it at non-peak heat hours, right? You're going to do it early or late, and but you have to find what works for you. And remember, sometimes for me, it wasn't developing a diet, it was developing a lifestyle.
Outstanding. Just want to remind everyone to join us this Saturday and next Saturday at the Malcolm X West Side Learning Center. That Saturday from 10 to 3 for an awesome resource fair. It's called Summer Wellness Resource Fair. So join us at the Malcolm X Learning Center right on West Madison Street. Well, Congressman?
Well, the information has been so profound until I could really listen to it all night, or if not all night, at least till 12. But we won't do 12. But it's really important, and I think it's so important that we try and be as healthy, because we're going to have some tough times between now and November. Our country is in serious directional conflict. And I don't know how we deal with that, except trying to end up making the kind of decisions that will keep the trends moving so that we continue to progress. Nikki and I met with an organization, and we'll talk more about it later on. And of course, part of their purpose is to reduce loneliness among senior populations. And that's something I'm not sure that we think about as much as we probably need to. That there are illnesses and sicknesses, and the average family probably spend more than 20% of whatever it is that they earn just trying to be healthy or trying to have access to health insurance. And so that's a big piece of our gross economic resource. And we spend a lot of money on it. And yet, some of the results that we look for, we often compare with other countries and saying that we're not in as good a shape as they are, and they don't necessarily spend as much. And I can only conclude that a good deal of that comes as a result of individuals not paying as much attention to their health or their individual health. as they could. So if we manage to just change somebody's behavior just a little bit, and that results in a different quality of life, then it's amazing to me how worthwhile this is. And so I want to thank our practitioners for giving, again, of their time, energy, effort to make sure that we have access to this kind of information. I don't know if you realize how effective, but when I listen to the questions that people raise and the answers that they receive, then I know that we're actually on the right track and we're moving in the right direction. So I just thank you again. Have a good evening. And I'm delighted that I was able to get back from the other activity that I was involved in to pick up the last of the discussion. So thank you so much. Have a good evening. And I hope to see all of us next week. So thank you.
Well, absolutely. And before we go, I know you guys have been texting what is our Until Next Mondays. Here is our group Until Next Monday for you. Hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. Make sure that it's water. Wear light clothing. Find the cooling centers. And we'll see you on next Monday. Good night.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all.